everyone, it's me, Roxanne, and I'm back with a new video featuring the Singer Quantum Stylist 9960. This is part 18 in my ongoing video series featuring this wonderful machine. In this segment, I will be showing you how to use 3 different seam guides, one of which came with the machine. I also will be talking to you about why seam guides and seam allowances being accurate are so important when you're sewing. So stay tuned. The first of the 3 seam guides I'm going to show today was actually included with your purchase, and it's noted here as number 10 in your manual. You might have noticed this odd-shaped piece of metal with a screw and wondered what that was. Well, now I'm going to show you how to use it. Here's the actual seam guide, and it is odd, but this is where the fabric will ride after this is attached to the needle plate. So now I'm going to show you how to attach it. Here I am at the front bed of your sewing machine, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit now so you can really see the screw hole that we're going to use to attach this accessory. This is the screw hole now that this screw will be screwed into to attach your seam guide. So let's place the slide over the screw hole and screw it right down to the needle bed of your machine. Leave it free until you've measured your seam allowance, and then tighten it down. I want to caution you not to tighten it down too tight because you don't want to damage the plastic on your machine, the metal throat plate, or your plastic bobbin cover. The easiest way I find to set my seam guide is using a seam gauge. I've decided I'm going to set it at a 1/2 inch. Now I will need to line up this 1/2 inch line on my ruler with the needle of the machine. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so you can see a close-up. I'm going to place that down and line that up with my needle, and then I'm going to push my seam guide in to meet it and screw it down. And one of the things I'd like you to take notice of is how the seam guide interacts perfectly with the seam guide on the back part of the needle bed. That's one of the biggest complaints that I get about this machine, is that all the designations are marked so far back on the needle plate that it's really hard to find the right guide to follow as you're sewing. So that's why a seam guide can be so important to help you really learn how to keep a consistent seam as you're sewing. The next seam guide I'm showing you today is the magnetic seam guide, and I'm going to get a close-up. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this is made by Dritz, and you can see that there's wear on this seam guide, and I've used it for years and years. The magnetic seam guide is a little bit controversial. Some people say that it will damage a computerized machine. I can't speak to that because I've used it for years and I've never had an issue on any of my machines. But if you are at all concerned about it, I would say don't use this seam guide if you're concerned about your machine. The magnetic seam guide works similarly to the screw-on seam guide, except it just magnetizes itself right to the needle plate with a very strong hold. You can use your seam gauge to measure the same way as we did before, from your needle over to wherever you'd like your seam allowance to end. Now to remove it, it has a little tab on the side, and you just pull up very easily to remove your seam guide. The last seam guide I'm going to show you is actually attached to a foot. it has this seam guide that slides on this arm, and it has small, what I would say 1/16 and 1/8 of an inch grooves embedded into, I think there's a pretty good picture of it right there, embedded into the metal, and the plastic just slides along and falls into each one of these grooves. So you can get quite a variety of different seam allowances with this foot. Now I'm going to show you how to install it on the machine. Now before I put the new foot on the machine, I have to remove the old foot. And that's done by pressing a button in the back, and the foot will fall right off. Place the new foot underneath the shank and lower your presser foot, and it will snap right in. When using the guide on this foot, I would set it up the same way as I did for the magnetic seam guide and the screw-on seam guide. I would use my gauge, and I would align my needle with wherever I want my seam allowance to be. Here I'm lining it up at 3/4. And the only difference here is I would put my foot down in order to slide in my guide right up against my seam gauge. The last step that I'm going to show you today is running a piece of fabric through using the seam guide. Now this will be the same across the board for the magnetic seam guide and the screw-on seam guide. You'll insert your fabric, and you will take note to have your fabric ride right up against the seam guide here. Put your foot down. Notice how the fabric edge is touching right up against the seam guide. And that's as easy as it is to get perfect, accurate seams every time. Thank you so much for watching my latest video in my series on the Singer Quantum Stylist 9960. I hope you've learned something new about seam guides, and maybe you'll be incorporating them into your sewing and investing in either the magnetic seam guide or possibly the foot. So have a happy creative day. Bye now.